With over 1,000 miles of shoreline, you have so many opportunities to chase Dungeness crabs up and down the west coast, and today we're going to go through the top 10 Dungeness crabbing tips to help you catch more crabs. What is up, Outdoor Mavericks? Welcome back to the channel, to the Dungeness crabbing top 10 tips. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you guys know that I love going Dungeness crabbing. It's something that I have been doing since I was a wee little lad, and something I enjoy sharing with others and taking others crabbing to learn not only how to catch the crabs, but cook them and enjoy them as well. Now, whether you're a beginner and never gone crabbing and somebody who's a little bit more seasoned, there's still opportunities to get better at crabbing, and I've got just the tips that are going to help you, no matter what your experience, help you catch a lot of Dungeness crabs. Now, starting with tip number 10, you want to crab in the months that end with R, but don't overlook January and February as a couple of really good crabbing months. Now, why the months that start with R? Well, those are the times when the water starts to cool off a lot and the crabs get really big and really full. And you want those male crabs full of meat, and they get super big in the fall time frame. And typically for me, that's really starting after Labor Day in September and runs all the way through the end of the year. Now, what I found in the last couple years is January and February is still really good crabbing as well. You got to beat the weather and you got to stay dry, so bring some gear, but you could be rewarded with some really good crabbing days in the dead of winter. So if you're looking for the best crabbing of the year, go with the months that end with R, and January and February as well. Now, tip number 9 is to pay attention to the weather. Now, with more fresh water in the bay because of the rain, the crabs are going to be less likely to go farther up in the bay, and you're going to have a harder time catching crabs. They're going to be more towards the jaws and the inlet. And in particular, when it rains a lot, the crabbing just seems to slow down a lot because there's more fresh water versus the saltier water that they want to hang out in. But the rain also impacts the water levels of the bay, and you want to pay very close attention to where the crabs are hanging out and certain depths of water that they're hanging out in more. And then, of course, water clarity. You know, when it rains a lot, there's going to be a lot of muck, there's going to be a lot of debris in the water, and you want to pay very close attention to see the clarity of the water, because in the dirtier water, you're going to need to use a lot more scent to get the attention of the crabs when the water is very off color. So pay attention to the weather, pay attention to the water conditions and how rain is impacting the bay that you're crabbing, and you're going to give yourself a really good advantage. Now, tip number 8 is to use chicken as your main bait, but don't be afraid to use other types of bait. Dungeness crabs just love meat. Now, whether that comes in the form of chicken or fish or even dog food or duck legs or shad, they just love the taste and smell of meat, especially the stinkier stuff, the better. But when it comes to your bait, you also don't want the sea lions to be attracted to that fish. So that's why I always suggest to go with chicken as your main bait, because the crabs absolutely love it and the sea lions will stay away from it. But that doesn't mean that you can't use other baits like shad and chicken. I use duck legs a lot, and I've seen people use dog food. I've seen people use mink. There's all kinds of different baits out there, but I would say as a starting bait, go with chicken and then diversify your bait selection when you're crabbing that day, and you're gonna be able to find some success no matter what type of bait you are. And if there's that one hot bait that's not chicken, you may end up crushing it on the bay. Now, tip number 7 is to measure crabs correctly. And if you don't know what you're doing, you could be keeping undersized crabs, and that can get you in a lot of trouble. Don't ask me how I know. Now, when it comes to Dungeness crabbing, each state between California, Washington, and Oregon have different size regulations. In Oregon, the correct measurement is 5 3/4 on the inside of the 2 back points across the back of the crab. Now, Washington legal size is 6 inches, and in California, it can be 6 1/4, as well as in parts of Canada, it could be 6 and even 6 1/4 as well. So firstly, know what state you're crabbing in and the regulation size. Secondly, you have to measure inside the 2 back points. Now, if your measure can slide easily up and down the side, it's too small, you should throw it back. Now, if you can't push the measure down the side and it's getting stuck, that means that it's over 5 3/4 or 6 inches, depending on where you're crabbing, and that's going to be a legal size keeper. So if you're a seasoned pro, you know how to measure, but if you're teaching somebody new, but take your time and show somebody new how to measure crabs so they're not throwing the keepers back. Don't ask me how I know. Now tip number 6 is to gear up for a fun time. And when it comes to crabbing, you have your normal traps or rings, your buoys, your bait, the normal type of gear that you absolutely critical when it comes to crabbing. But to enjoy the crabbing experience, I would recommend getting some really good rubberized waterproof gloves, some zip ties just to make sure your traps are staying connected, your bait cages are staying together. You never know when you're going to need to use a zip tie, and I always carry extras on the boat, especially the rubberized zip ties that you can use more than once. And if you don't want to get wet, definitely I would recommend some waders or some waterproof pants and a jacket from Columbia Sportswear, some of the best waterproof gear out there, and a good pair of rubberized boots so you're not slipping around in the boat, and so you got some good traction to the floorboards of the boat. It's simple pieces of gear that can make the experience a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable, especially on those days where it's a monsoon out there but the crabbing is really hot. Now tip number 5 is to crab the incoming tide, and this was one of the first tips I ever learned from my grandpa when I went out crabbing the first time with him. Now the reason why you want to crab the incoming tide versus the outgoing tide is the water is coming into the bay on the incoming tide, which means the crabs are flushing into that bay on the incoming tide, and when it's outgoing after high tide, that means the water is flushing out and the crabs flush out with the water as well. So your best opportunity to catch legal crab is on that incoming tide when more crabs are flushing into the bay, and there's going to be a better and more opportunity to get those male keepers. Now that's not to say you can crab all the time, especially the outgoing tide. Some people leave their crab gear out for 12 plus hours, let it soak for a long time, and that's okay. But if you want your best opportunity to get a lot of keepers and you only have a limited time to go crabbing, you gotta crab the incoming tide. Now tip number 4 is to spread your gear up and down the bay. Now this is something that is super critical because day to day the crabbing can be very different, especially in very small areas, and that's why I would recommend that you have your gear spread out, some in the lower part of the bay, some maybe in the middle or the higher part of the bay. You also don't want to deploy your crabbing gear in a straight line. You want to spread it out because the crabs might be coming in on a certain lane into the bay, and if your gear is not covering that lane, you are going to completely miss the crabs altogether. So spread out your gear as well as try different depths in the water. Crab maybe some more rocky and sandy areas, maybe some more muddy areas with some more vegetation. You want to spread your gear out, and then when you find the crab, and if you find an area with a lot of crabs, move a couple of pieces of gear over to that area and you should be able to get much quicker limits. Now tip number 3 is to add attractants, and this is something that has given me a huge advantage over the last few years. By adding that crab attractant in the form of smelly jelly, some ProCure, or some Potski, you're adding some extra nutrients, some extra amino acids, and some extra fishy flavor to say chicken or other baits that's really going to attract more Dungeness crabs into the traps. Now for brining, I like to do it at least 30 minutes before I hit the water, and with the smelly jelly, it's that gel form so you can just wipe it onto that chicken or that fish carcass or whatever bait that you're using, and it's going to stick on there really good, and it smells horrible to us, but the crabs absolutely love it. Now in the last couple of years when I've added attractant, I feel like it's given me a huge advantage, and I've gotten just a few more crabs or a lot more crabs than everybody else that I'm crabbing around. So if you want to take your crabbing to the next level and get on more keepers, definitely add some attractant, and it's going to help you catch a lot more crabs. Now tip number 2 has to do with deploying the gear, and that is to deploy the buoy first, then throw out the trap or the ring, because it can be really easy to get knots in the line, to get tangles in the line, and if you throw the trap first and you're not paying attention, the rope wraps around your leg, you could be in a really bad spot. And that happened to me as a kid a couple of times, and it was pretty scary. Like, I almost got pulled overboard, and that's when we decided, hey, throw the buoy first, then throw the trap. It's still going to land flat on the bottom, you're still going to be crabbing, and you get all the knots out. You don't have to worry about any rope around any people's feet. You get it out nice and clean, and it just makes it a lot more safe on the boat, especially with people that have never crabbed before. So next time you head out, especially crabbing from the boat, throw out the buoy first, let your line out, and then throw your trap out, because it's going to be a lot more safer at the end of the day. So now that we've gone through tips 10 through 2, well, what's tip number 1? That is to make small adjustments throughout the crabbing day. Now when I'm talking adjustments, I'm talking about location, I'm talking about different depths of water, different types of attractant, even different types of bait. Make adjustments throughout the day, find those pockets where the big crabs are hanging out. You might have to move locations, you might just have to try different bait attractants, but when you find that right perfect location and the perfect bait, switch other pots and gear to that, and you're going to be able to get on a lot of crab really quickly. Now, when the crabbing's really hot, making adjustments isn't going to make that big of a difference, but on slower days, and especially in the spring and the summertime, those subtle adjustments can be the biggest difference between maybe going home with 6 crabs and going home with a dozen keepers and getting a limit. And there you guys have it, the top 10 Dungeness crabbing tips. I hope you guys got some great information from today's video, and if you did, hit that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. I'll see you guys on the next one, and as always, you guys, the outdoors is a gift. Go crabbing with others.